Last month I published alongside my annual report a subject report on the development of citizenship in schools. The report celebrates the success of some schools in implementing the citizenship curriculum. It praises those schools where there have been substantial developments in the subject, and which now go a long way towards fulfilling national curriculum requirements. In the report we are critical of schools which have not taken citizenship seriously, either through reluctance or lack of capacity to make appropriate provision in the curriculum. Citizenship is marginalized in the curriculum in 1/5 of schools. It is less well established in the curriculum than other subjects, and less well taught, and some critics have seized on this as a reason for wanting to step back from supporting it. Yet, the progress made to date by the more committed schools suggests that the reasons for introducing citizenship are both worthwhile and can be fulfilled, given the time and resources. Indeed, those reasons are given added weight by national and global events of the past few months. While not claiming too much, citizenship can address core skills, attitudes and values that young people need to consider as they come to terms with a changing world.
However, we have to be realistic. Language death is not a mainstream theater. It is not mainstream anything. Can you imagine Hollywood taking it on? It is so far outside the mindsets of most people that they have difficulty appreciating what the crisis is all about, because they are not used to thinking more about language as an issue in itself. Somehow, we need to change these mindsets. We need to get people thinking about language more explicitly, more intimately, more enthusiastically. Interest in a language is certainly there, in the general population. Most people are fascinated by such topics as where words come from, or what the origin of their town's name is, or whether their baby's name means anything. They are certainly prepared to play Scrabble and a host of other language games ad infinitum, and language games are often found on radio and television, too, but a willingness to focus that interest on general issues, a preparedness to take on board the emotion and drama inherent in the situation of language endangerment, is not something that happens much.
The origins of jazz are as richly textured as the music itself. The term jazz really covers many different kinds of music. In the late 19th century, African Americans began performing the folk music known as the blues, whose origins lay in the work songs of slavery days. Within the African American community, the blues evolved into popular commercial music. In 1914, a black orchestra leader named W.C. Handy wrote the St. Louis Blues. Adapting the African American folk idiom to European conventions of orchestration and harmony, Handy produced a hit song. The St. Louis Blues was tremendously influential among black and white musicians, and Handy's style of music became famous under the name of jazz. Early jazz musicians were active in many cities and towns throughout the southern United States. It was New Orleans, with its long tradition of African American music, that was the home of many fathers of jazz. After World War I, the musicians of New Orleans joined the general northward migration of African Americans. The first great national center of jazz was Chicago. From there, the music entered the mainstream and even gave its name to the decade.
Listen to an art instructor talk about composition.
Composition is the organization of shapes and forms into a whole, an expressive whole. The elements of composition, line, shape, tone, and color, need to be well arranged, need to be ordered, they need to be coherent, just like the words and phrases and sentences in a piece of writing. All paintings have a compositional element. Successful paintings sort of suggest the third dimension, the sense that the design goes beyond the picture frame. A picture's unity, which includes the shapes, tones, and colors, is linked to what the artist has to say. The artist's message is strongest when it's clear. A composition is better if it says one thing strongly than if it tries to say too many things. A crowded composition is sort of fussy and splintered and
Did anyone happen to catch the American Metropolis last night? It was about the growth of cities.
I didn't see that, but I did see part of a documentary last week that told about a guy, I think he was a visitor from another country, who wrote a book about the growth of industry and so on, the things we've just studied. I remember he said there was a huge population explosion that turned America into a nation of cities all within a decade. He was talking mostly about Baltimore.
Baltimore then or now?
In the 19th century, right after the Civil War.
The program you saw was part of the same series as the one I want to tell you about. Last night the topic was New York City. As early as 1880, the federal government wrote a report on how the 5 separate municipalities of New York actually constituted one vast metropolitan area. It was a progressive way of thinking at the time, and within 20 years, those 5 municipalities were officially united as a single city by a vote of the people. To this day, however, each borough maintains traces of its original independence.
I agree with that. I'm from Brooklyn, and it's definitely different from the rest of New York.
Because of their protected status, a lot of bears have lost their fear of people. This may make them appear tame, but they're still potentially very dangerous. Bears are wild animals. 1 or 2 bear attacks occur each year in Glacier Park. The majority of attacks occur because people have surprised the bear.
What should we do if we surprise a bear?
You should try to avoid encounters in the first place by being alert and make noise, talk loud, holler. Bears will usually move out of the way if they hear people approaching.
Some people say to carry bells or put bells on your pack.
Most bells, even the so-called bear bells, are not loud enough. Calling out or clapping hands at regular intervals are better ways to make your presence known.
But isn't it kind of rude to make a lot of noise in the woods? I mean, people go there for peace and quiet.
In bear country, noise is good for you. Hiking quietly endangers you, the bear, and other hikers. People sometimes assume they don't have to make noise while hiking on a well-used trail. Some of the most frequently used trails in Glacier Park are surrounded by excellent bear habitat. You can't predict when and where bears might appear along a trail.
That's for sure. I remember my surprise when a black bear charged me. It must have been running away from hikers who surprised it on the trail ahead of me.
Don't assume a bear's hearing is any better than your own. Some trail conditions make it hard for bears to see, hear, or smell approaching hikers. You should be especially careful near streams, against the wind, or in dense vegetation. Stay with your group and, if possible, avoid hiking early in the morning, late in the day, or after dark, when bears are more likely to be active. Bears spend a lot of time eating, so avoid hiking in areas like berry patches or fields of glacier lilies.
How will the bear act if we surprise it?
Bears react differently to each situation. They may appear to tolerate you and then attack without warning. The most important advice I can give you is never to approach a bear intentionally.
Many different types of barcode scanning machines exist, but they all work on the same fundamental principles. They all use the intensity of light reflected from a series of black and white stripes to tell the computer what code it is to see. White stripes reflect light very well, while black stripes reflect hardly any lights at all. The barcode scanner shines light sequentially across the barcode, simultaneously detecting and recording a pattern of reflected and non-reflected light. The scanner then translates this pattern into an electrical signal that the computer can understand. All scanners must include computer software to interpret the barcode once it has been entered. This simple principle has transformed the way we are able to manipulate data and the way in which many businesses handled record keeping.
In that month or 6 weeks, the patient may feel perfectly well. He may even travel around the world, spending hours packed into crowded airplanes with unsuspecting fellow passengers. That's bad enough with regular TB or with strains that are resistant to 2 or 3 mainline drugs used to treat the disease. But it's a potential public health catastrophe with a new strain called XDR-TB. For extensively drug-resistant tuberculosis, the strain is impervious to a wide array of first and second-line drugs. That's why 30% or more of its victims die. And that's why people like Lawrence Gostin are rethinking what public health authorities should do about people with suspected XDR-TB in the weeks before the diagnosis is in.
Okay, see, the thing is that I've had a look at the peer reviews about the funding application, which you suggested that I do. But what I found is that several reviewers are saying that there isn't actually sufficient focus on my topic. Right. I think that is actually the case, but I remember that the proposal is based around things that have already been done. And the fact that it's just one of a number of factors, and these affect health and safety. I think areas around of stress, they cover up much more ground. So I think if you're sort of upfront about it, and you say, look, I need a wider spectrum here, we could perhaps suggest something else to try and measure bullying in the workplace.
If you're a senior citizen, music in the background may be distracting, but for younger people, experts at multitasking, it's apparently no big deal. That's according to a study in the journal Gerontologist. Researchers recruited 103 people, half between the ages of 18 and 30, the others between 60 and 75. The volunteers then took part in memorization exercises and a drill where they had to quickly match a photo of a face with the same face in an array of unfamiliar faces. Some participants did the exercises in silence. Others performed the tasks while listening to white noise or instrumental jazz, blues, classical, and electronic music. Across age groups, the consensus was that the background sound was distracting, but only older people's performance suffered when the noise was present. For example, older folks who did the face matching with music playing remembered 10% fewer faces. The result matches up with the theory that the elderly are less able to filter out what's called distracting task-relevant information. In this case, the distracting info might have interfered with them storing the facial image in the first place, much less impeding their ability to remember it a short while later.
I think it's really important for young people not to feel restricted in their choices and also to be aware of the choices that are available to them, and obviously the media has an incredibly important role to play in that, in letting people know the great range of science that is out there and is potentially a career. I think we tend to talk about science as this big kind of monolith, but of course actually it's this beautiful multifaceted thing. There's almost something for everybody there. There are so many different aspects of it that really attract lots of different types of personality, I think, and somebody that's going to be attracted to working in biology might be a very different person from somebody who's attracted to engineering. I suppose it's about knowing the breadth of opportunities that are out there, and so anything that universities and broadcast media can do to make sure that those opportunities are visible, I think, is really important.
Stanford University.
We all get depressed. Bad stuff happens to us. We all get depressed. We feel lousy. We feel withdrawn. We feel sort of a sense of grief, and we're not taking much pleasure, and we withdraw. And then we get better. We cope. We heal. We deal with things in life. What's the deal with you that you can't do that? And there's this lurking sense, given that all of us have periods of being depressed and come out the other end, when you look at people who instead go down and stay down there to this crippling extent, there's always this little voice between the lines there of, come on, pull yourself together. We all deal with this sort of thing. I will make the argument throughout here that depression is as real of a biological disorder as is juvenile diabetes. And you don't sit down a diabetic and say, oh, come on, what's with this insulin stuff? Stop babying yourself and pull it together. You will see this is just as much of a biological disorder.
Parents and other adults with whom children have close contact have a powerful influence on children's food preferences. Children are very sensitive to the reactions of those around them, and if they see others enjoying a particular food, they will be inclined more favourably towards that food. Thus, if parents want to persuade their children to eat more vegetables, then rather than simply telling them what to eat, it's more effective to demonstrate that they themselves
The European Economic Community was established in 1957 Its aim was, in broad terms, to move towards closer political and economic cooperation. Today, the much larger European Union has a far-reaching influence on many aspects of our lives, from the conditions we work under to the safety standards we must adhere to and the environment in which we live. In order to achieve the free flow of goods and services, workers and capital between the member countries, they needed to establish mutual policies in areas as diverse as agriculture, transport and working conditions. When they had agreed on these policies, they became law. Now, though, the EU is concerned with a far wider range of issues.
When you hear things like human DNA differs from chimp DNA by only a couple %, you can't help but wonder, how can that be? How can so few changes make such a big difference? Researchers working with fruit bats and mice think they have an answer, and it lies less in the animal's genes than in the short snippets of DNA that control when and where and how vigorously genes are turned on. If you've ever thought that a bat is basically just a rodent with wings, you're not too far from the mark. One of the most obvious differences between bats and mice is their forearms. Mice have these stubby little legs, and bats have these large, leathery wings. But even those differences are not as major as you might imagine. Mice and bats both have a gene called PRX1, which regulates limb development, but the gene is more active in the budding wings of bats. So the researchers took the piece of DNA that controls PRX1 activity from a bat and stuck it into a mouse. The result, pictured in the January 15 issue of Genes in Development, mice that have longer front legs. Okay, they didn't sprout wings, but the study shows that even small changes can have big consequences. Thanks for the minute. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
You can keep your bags in the back room.
Remember, the prestigious election of student membership has strict eligibility criteria.
Essays and assignments spread out across the academic year.
food containing too many calories provides little or no nutritional value.
Participation rate in the study of language learning exceeded the expectations.
You can contact oil traders by email.
Resources and materials are on hold on the library reference desk.
The university provides different excellence of facilities for students and staff.
All industries can be thought of a system as input, process, output and feedback.
Financial help for undergraduate study is available on application.
A national collection center for students is currently being built.